Substance Painter just released its new ribbon tool, and it comes with all these really cool assets like leather straps, tape, welding, zippers. So I figured now would be a good time to show you step by step how you can easily make your own ribbon in Substance Designer. It is now much easier than before, so if you ever wanted to make that kind of thing but were too daunted to try, this video is for you. But first, a few words about the ribbon function in Painter. To access it, you need to be in paint mode. So let's create a paint layer. Then in the path menu, pick ribbon path and simply trace your path. By default, it will come up as an empty white band, but then you can pick any of the assets listed here, or any material and image for that matter. The ribbon essentially maps material to a path, meaning you can increase the size, you can move the points, and the material will just go with the flow. And if you cross the path with itself, you will get a nice overlap like this, which is really cool. Now let's see how we can make our own ribbon asset. And yes, we are going to need Substance Designer for that. The good news is that things are significantly simpler with the ribbon technology. So if you ever wanted to ease yourself in Substance Designer with an approachable task, I think that's a good challenge. So with Substance Designer open, we're going to click on New Substance Graph. And here there's no need for a specific setup. You can just run with the default metallic roughness template. There we go. So we have all our maps here. We have our base color, our normal, roughness, metallic, etc. So before we start making things here, let's take a moment to set up a live link between this graph and our Painter project, just so that we can test things in real time. So the first thing we want to do is obviously save our designer package, like that. And then we want to publish it as an SBSAR file, as a Substance archive. So you just click on that button here, pick a location. All right, and this SBSAR file is what we are going to feed into our ribbon in Substance Painter. So let's hop over to Painter, and here we need to do two things. First, we're going to go to the bottom right of the Assets panel and click on that circling arrow that says Auto Update. And you want to make sure that Resources Used in Project is checked. What this means is that if you make a change that is used in your layer stack, it will update both in the shelf and in the layer stack, which is exactly what we need because we don't want to have to reapply the material each time we make a change, right? And you also want to keep the refresh rate at 0. This way, the update will be triggered as soon as you switch to the Painter window. All right, so with that done, we can fetch our SBSAR file, drag and drop it in our project, then apply it to the ribbon that we drew. If the path is active, if it's highlighted in blue like that, you can just click on the new resource and it will automatically apply it. Or you can also scroll down the path properties until you reach the material section, and here you just drag and drop your material in that slot. Just a quick note about that, if you ever end up tweaking your ribbon properties but nothing happens in the viewport and you can't figure out why, that's because you accidentally clicked out of the path, so you need to reselect it. This is something that happened to me multiple times, so now you know. Alright, so now what we see here, that grey band, is the exact reflection of what we have here, and the two are now linked. So if I were to change something in the graph, for instance, let me pick a different color, alright, all I have to do to propagate that change to Painter is to republish that SBSAR, either by clicking here on that circling arrow or by pressing Ctrl-Shift-B. Now if I switch to Painter, here we go. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. For this exercise, we're going to block out some sort of leather strap. So I'm not going to do the whole material with you because this is beyond the scope of this tutorial, but if you want to look into the finished, fleshed out version, you can open the project directly from the new graph window. Just scroll down the template list and there you have it. Alright, so our strap should have a certain width and thickness, so this is where I would start, using a horizontal gradient, followed by a histogram scan to lay out the overall profile. Let's connect that to the normal. Crank it up a bit, and let's also connect it to the height. And here I'm going to do a quick adjustment because I don't want any negative height in Painter, so using a levels node, switching it to slider mode for more precision, I'm going to take the levels out low to 0.5, which is Painter mid-level. Okay, now let's republish. Alright, we see our profile here, so far so good, but there are a few problems we need to tackle. First, I don't know if you can tell, but the normal looks way too strong in Painter if we compare with what we have in Designer. And the reason for that is that Painter actually combines the height map and the normal map. So it's literally adding our height map to the normal. And you can see it clearly if you switch to channel view by pressing C. So this is the normal alone. and this is the combined the height and normal. So unless your height and normal support different kind of information, we would recommend to just disable one of them depending on what you prefer to work with. We can do that in Painter directly by unchecking one of them, but if we don't want to have to do it manually each time, there's a small trick you can do in Designer. So just go to the output you want to disable by default. Let's take the normal, for instance. And in the user data field, just type in disable equal true. And that's it. Now the normal will be off by default, and you can turn it back on if you need to. Okay, now we have another more important problem, and that's the fact that the color spreads up to the edges of the ribbon. And we obviously don't want that. We want it to stick to the actual surface of the strap. So that leads us to a first important concept when making ribbons: masking. We need to ship our material with a mask so that it doesn't just get cut out at the border like that. So let's create that mask in Designer. I'm going to use a threshold node for that. It's just a very handy node to quickly scan through grayscale values, like so. All right, now we need to create a dedicated output to signal that this is a mask so that it gets treated properly in Painter. So output, connect our mask to it. And the way you flag it as a mask is by typing channels_alpha in the identifier field. And that's it. There's no need to fill out the rest. What this is doing is that it's telling Painter to use this output to mask out all the channels that this material has. If you don't follow this naming convention and name it something else like, I don't know, opacity or something, what's going to happen is that Painter will not recognize this output as a mask, and so you will have to go in the channels mapping section and here select the mask manually. That's clearly not ideal, so remember, if you want to use something as a material mask in Painter, that's channels_alpha. So let's test it. There we go. All right, so we now have a proper mask that cuts out our leather strap. It works pretty well if you ask me, and in most scenarios this would be enough, just one solid mask to mark out the central element. But sometimes you need finer control over each map. And let me just give you an example with this top stitch material. So these stitches here, as you can see, they have a solid mask for the base color, something that covers just the threads. But they also come with puckering, and all these folds that expand outwards, they rely on a separate mask, right? They don't just stop at the stitch itself. And if we look at the height channel, we can guess what that mask looks like. It's this sort of long faded waves. So if you want to do something like that, you will need a different approach. Instead of having one mask ruling all the maps, and let's actually delete that output, we'll give each map its own alpha channel. So we're not going to touch the outputs, we're just going to squeeze in that alpha information right at the end. There are different nodes you can use for that. For color inputs, I would recommend using the alpha merge node. You just hook your mask to the alpha input, and you're good to go. For grayscale inputs, there are two main methods. You can use an RGBA merge. So you plug your input in the first 3 slots and your mask in the last one. Or you can use the channel shuffle node, you know, that mysterious atomic node that no one ever uses. Well, you can plug your input in the first slot, your mask in the second, and in the properties, you just keep all of this as is and simply take any channel from the second output as your alpha. Either way, you should end up with outputs that are all RGB with an alpha channel. Now, this method doesn't mean that each map has to have a different mask. It just means that now you can personalize the one you want. So in this case, the color and roughness, they can share the same mask. But if we want to create some bulging or puckering around the strap, then the height map needs a different treatment. So I made this basic node setup to create a puckering effect. It's just a stretched purlin that I distorted a little. And now if I want these folds to show up in Painter, I need to expand the mask specifically for the height so that it doesn't just stop here, but also takes in the folds, right? So I can do so by expanding the base mask, for instance, with a bevel node. Then I would maybe break it up a little by fetching my purlin over here and multiplying it on top, just so the edges are not so straight. And I can then plug that to my alpha channel. Let's republish to test that in Painter. Right, make a few adjustments. Republish. All right, it's looking okay, but there's one thing that bothers me, and that's the repetition of it, how much it is styling. So let me explain. By default, in Substance Designer, we're working with the 1-to-1 ratio. This is the good old square we see in the 2D view. But square outputs might not be ideal when working on a ribbon, because by nature ribbons are more long than large. If we want to fill out the path with something that is square without stretching it, we will obviously have to repeat it quite a bit. To illustrate it, I added this frame in the base color just so you can visualize how many times our material is actually tiling. And as you can see, for this length alone, the material is repeating many times, which can be a problem if you want to avoid, obvious repetitions. That problem can easily be solved if you switch your designer graph to a non-square ratio. So how do you do that? You might be tempted to go up here in the toolbar to change the whole graph resolution, just breaking that link and dialing in the ratio you want. But I wouldn't recommend that because that resolution is going to be dynamically overridden depending on the context you will load that SBSR in. So let's say I set my graph at 2048 by 512 resolution. All my nodes automatically update, fine. But if I were to load that resource in a Painter texture set that is 2K by 2K, then that's the resolution that my graph is going to be rendered at. So we don't want that. We want to make sure our nodes keep the right ratio no matter what. And in order to do that, we need to double-click anywhere in the empty space of the graph to access its space parameters. Then simply go up here and take that height slider down. That will divide the resolution on that axis by as many steps. So -2 means that I'm dividing the original 2048 resolution by 4. And if you want to know what that makes, you can just hover over any node to check out the result. So you will end up with a stretched display in the 3D view. So to compensate for that, you can just go to the materials properties and adjust the UV scale here. What's interesting about this technique is that it's just changing the ratio, not the resolution. And so it will adapt dynamically to whatever resolution our graph renders at. Keep in mind, though, that some nodes might have a different behavior with a rectangular ratio, so I would recommend to set that up from the start to avoid having to readjust too many things. Now let's push our changes, see the difference it makes in Painter. Now the strap is only tiling twice. It feels way less repetitive and will be able to fit a lot of details and variation in that space. Alright, we're almost done. There's one last thing we need to talk about, and that's how to set up your ribbon material as a dynamic brush. And by that I mean how to control the look of the material based on the tile position in the path. So when you draw a path, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And what you can do is use that information to drive some changes in your SBSR. It's super simple to set up, so let's do it together. I prepared two variations of the strap, one with a loop here, that would be for the beginning, and one with this triangle cut for the end. So we have the three pieces of our puzzle. Now we just need to find a way to tell Painter which one to pick when. So in order to do so, we'll use a multi-switch node that will act as a toggle between the plain version and these two variations. Let's increase the input number to 3. Now here comes the important part, so pay attention. We're going to expose the input selection. Click here. And in the expose window, you want to write exactly this in the identifier field. Stamp, stroke, position. And then in the type editor, change that to drop-down list, create 3 entries, 0, 1, 2. Now here comes the part that's a bit counterintuitive, so bear with me. Painter treats the middle as the default, and so it comes first in the list. So 0 here is for the middle, and then comes the start of the path, so type in begin, and lastly comes the end. So middle, begin, end in that order. Means that whatever you're going to plug in that first slot is going to occupy the center of the path. So we're going to take our plain strap here. Okay. Then comes the start of the path, so that's the one with the loop. And finally, the end. Right, so we're almost done here. There's just one last thing we need to do to make it work, and I'm sorry if it does sound a little bit silly, but Painter's stamp stroke count starts at 0 and Designer's input count starts at 1. So to sync the two, we just need a little trick. In the input selection that we've exposed, you're going to click on Edit Function Graph. And here, we're just going to add 2 nodes, an addition and an integer set to 1. Connect the two, then right-click the addition to set it as output node. It should turn orange, and now Painter and Designer count will match, and we can finally push this to Painter. And it works. We have our beginning here, our end, and the plain version in the middle. So that covers most of the techniques you need to understand to make your own ribbon. The rest is just standard material making. I hope you found this helpful and that it motivates you to create your own custom ribbons.